So today, progressive procurement and supply chain functions have become more strategic in our corporate boardrooms. And with this in mind, what are some of the beliefs of business leaders like you on how technology and service providers integrate with their collaborative vendor management decisions?
Yeah, I understand that the business needs. I think the sourcing strategically and finding the right suppliers is the key for a great relationship. So vendor management is become a most important piece in the way the suppliers are managed. I think majority of the business users do not understand really the life cycle of a contract, right? I think majority of them feel like, hey, once you have a contract in place, okay, the procurement's role is done. So, but I think the procurement role is only a part of the process in securing the contract, but actually executing the contract through the life cycle, ensuring the value of the contract is realized, is something that majority of business users don't understand. But using the technology and tools and integrating with the vendors, it's going to help both sides to really understand the governance aspect of it, the financial management of it, and making sure the compliance aspect of it is actually fulfilled. And those items are actually discussed on a periodic basis, whether it's a QBR, MBR, but having those kind of relationships and bringing those items to the business is extremely important. So I think, for example, we as a company did not realize how global our supply chains are. When the pandemic started, we realized that we've been asked by the board to give them a risk assessment, and the ones we understood, we may be dealing with a company or a vendor based out of a particular location, but they could be having multiple chains across different regions and countries. So I think understanding that risk and conveying that risk back to the boardrooms is another important part. Now, lastly, on the ESG, and I think ensuring supply diversity is important. I think again, with the majority of a company's spend being done through third parties, it is important for us to making sure that we identify the right vendors with the right behaviors, and making sure that actually your ESG score can be dependent on your vendor's ESG score. So I think it's good to see majority of our suppliers actually also have ESG programs and publish them. So I encourage people to leverage those to make sure that they pick the right suppliers to ensure their ESG programs actually get augmented by the suppliers.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so when you think about this, procurement supply chain functions have become more strategic, and because of that, they're now getting more attention from the C-suite and the board, right? And so we got to be thinking about what are the beliefs as to how we're integrating technology and the service providers into our vendor management decisions, right? And so when I think about this, I think about it from a life cycle management perspective. And having come from financial services, we were highly regulated, and there are guidelines around third-party risk management that has really kind of come to the forefront now with the pandemic that happened, right? And so it's not just thinking about your third-party providers, but it's also thinking about what you call your nth tier, right? So you need to be thinking about how do you put in place the right shared objectives and the metrics. How do you actually define the roles clearly as to what you're doing as an organization? Because this is how you're going to unlock the efficiencies and maximize the contribution of your technology ventures. I also think that leaders must efficiently collaborate to generate value through their technology vendors, right? And so you got to be thinking about them again from an ecosystem perspective, so that you can really figure out how you're actually addressing the needs that you have across your organization with your third parties, but you're also having to think about it. So I think it's really simple. When you think about how you're going to manage that life cycle of your suppliers. You're going to think about it for planning. And that planning means that you need to be working from a procurement perspective with your end users on your category strategies, et cetera, as you prepare for what it is they want to do. Then you go into your due diligence, and I think that due diligence, we have the tools in place to help us with a lot of that information in your selection process, right? And then you go into your contracting. We now have very sophisticated contract lifecycle management tools that are really helping us to reduce that cycle time and allow us to be much more efficient in the way we're collaborating across that ecosystem. Then you go into your ongoing monitoring, and that ongoing monitoring is really allowing you to really make sure that both parties are living up to what they've agreed to do, and then see how this is deriving value for your end users, right? And then obviously, at the end of any life cycle, you're either going to come to a termination or a renewal. And so thinking about that in terms of a process, I think is really important. And then layering the technology. I don't think you should go after it from the technology first. So you need to make sure that your vendors are really understanding what your defined roles are, that they're really thinking about, what is that tech ecosystem that they have, and how do they actually bring the right partnerships to play in order for you to be actually, be much more effective in terms of what you're doing. And I think, as my fellow presenters today are talking about, I think that environmental, social, and governance is critical. And depending on where you are on a global basis, you've got to be thinking about things not just from an environmental perspective, but you got to be thinking about it in terms of, Modern Slavery Act. If you're doing business in Europe, UK, or in Australia, as an example, you got to be thinking about, how do we address the needs that we have for today while we prepare for tomorrow? Because what you don't want to do is put yourself in a situation to where you're so focused on a myopic problem that you have today that you're not actually understanding how that's going to impact you long term, right? And so I think that there's a lot of thought that is going in at the leadership level, challenging chief procurement officers and senior leaders to make sure that you're understanding that in this rapidly changing business environment, you are putting the strategies in place that are ultimately going to create the sustainability that you need as a business for the long term.
Hey, thank you very much. Jamie, I'm going to ask you the next question.
Sure.
So how are emerging technologies and the automation wave seen to dynamically impact the IT sourcing, IT procurement, and software buying processes?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think primarily the emerging technologies that we're seeing right now are eliminating a lot of the repetitive tasks that involve purchase requisitions, purchase orders out the door. We're now utilizing tools that will give you sort of a standard set of contractual terms and conditions that are considered best practice. As well as helping you develop service level agreements with your key suppliers, all suppliers actually, to make sure that you're holding up your end of the contractual agreement, and certainly they are as well. Again, they simplify the procurement of certain softwares so long as it's done correctly. And then also, from a cybersecurity perspective, the automating tools that we have right now allow us to go into a relationship knowing that the supplier that we're considering or the supplier we're selecting is SOC 2 compliant and following all best practices in terms of data center protection and things of that nature. So that's kind of like the primary impact that I'm seeing there. And in terms of IT asset life cycle and how it's influenced by automation, that's huge. Obviously any IT department's potential gap or uncovered area is when it comes to license compliance, right? So if you're not actively monitoring your assets, actively monitoring their usage, who's using them, where they're being used, you can find yourself in a situation where a vendor's auditing you, and you can be exposed to a huge financial risk there. So tools that monitor the software platforms you have out there, making sure that they're being used A perfect example is with a lot of the SaaS platforms we have out there. There you don't have to worry so much about license compliance, but what you do need to make sure is that you're actually getting what you're paying for. And so, your sales organization, for example, you may deploy 1,000 licenses to a product out there, and then you find out a year in that really half of them aren't using it. So, you can go back to the business and explain to them like, hey, either get your folks on board with this platform you've provided to them, or if it's not necessarily that they do, well, then let's go back and when we do our renewal with the supplier, say, you know what, we only need half of what we had before. So for too many years, I think organizations have seen a lot of money go out the door that didn't need to because people weren't actively monitoring the usage of the platforms that they had procured. So automation tools is huge there. I'm trying to think what else. Using automation to properly deploy and patch the software is big. It's important to us. And then when it's time to retire, decommission systems. Having automation tools there, can make sure that nothing's being left behind, so you're not being caught with your pants down for not being in compliance or using something you didn't think you were. So I would say those are the primary factors into IT lifecycle management and automation.
Okay, great examples. Thank you very much for sharing those.